Welcome to another episode of Your Life Simplified. My name is George Fernandez, and I'll be your host for this episode. Earlier this month, we conducted a webinar on the topic of socially conscious investing, and we thought we'd share it with you, our Your Life Simplified audience. So sit back and listen, and I'll be back at the end. I really am looking forward to this discussion, and this is a topic that I think that all of us are going to learn some things from that maybe we didn't know before. And during this conversation, my hope is that you'll walk away, with a few things that you can know, that you'll know about, aligning your values and your investments together. And you'll have some steps that you can take away with you from our call today. So I really look forward to the discussion. We have three guests with me today. They're going to help me do that. I have Ken Powell, Senior Portfolio Manager of Equities. I have Brad Rollins, Director Portfolio Implementation, and Andy Garrison, Senior Wealth Advisor. My name is George Fernandez. I'm the Vice President of Practice Management here at Mariner Wealth Advisors, and the topic today is socially conscious investing. And so I know, guys, I appreciate you all being here today. This is really going to be a good discussion. And I know that each of you brings a different skill set as we come in and talk about this particular topic. And but before we get into that, because I'm going to tap into the skill set for each of you, but before we get into that, let's maybe spend a couple minutes. You can share a little bit about who you are and what you do each day, for the company and for your clients. So, Andy, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, George. Excited to be here. This is a topic I'm passionate about. I know we all are here. I think it's something that we're able to implement for clients at Mariner and folks at Mariner, but at the same time, it's just really neat to see the evolution over time. And I'm able to work with people day to day at Mariner and help them implement both retirement plans and tax strategies, and of course, their investment strategies as well. And a big arm that I focus on is the socially conscious space within that.
That's great. Appreciate that. And Brad, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm the Director of Portfolio Implementation, which means I work a lot on how do we take all of these ideas that we're coming up with across Mariner and figure out how to effectively and efficiently get them into portfolios to really benefit clients. So that means I spend some time managing model portfolios. I also oversee parts of our diligence effort and part of our education effort. And then also there are some quantitatively driven investment portfolios or equity portfolios that I also manage.
Okay, great. And Ken?
I'm a senior portfolio manager on the equity side here at Mariner. I've been kind of working with the socially responsible, environmental, social governance type investments now for, it's probably been 8 or 9 years. And as Andy said, we're seeing kind of an explosion in this area. And we're finding that a lot of clients are really passionate about this type of investing, and therefore, we are getting more passionate about this type of investing.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's why I'm glad to have you guys on the call today, because I think each of us have a passion about what we do, and we kind of go about it from a different angle, different perspective. So it's great to have all these perspectives there. The way I look at what we're going to talk about today is I like to break this down in kind of little bite-sized chunks to kind of help us go through this discussion, because there's a lot here that we could talk about. We could probably spend hours talking about this. Not going to do that, of course. We're going to spend 30 to 45 minutes or so, but we do want to break this down, I think, into maybe some bite-sized chunks. And so what I had in mind is maybe to look at this, kind of what is socially conscious investing. There's a lot of terms out there, a lot of acronyms, SCI, SRI, ESG, impact investing. And I think it's important that we kind of have some understanding of what those things are. I also want to dig just a little bit into what the history of it is too, because I know, for the last, Ken, you just mentioned you've been working at this for 8 or 9 years. And I remember a time when we said, yeah, you never want to invest in those kinds of strategies because you'll never get a return on your dollar. And so I want to talk a little bit about that and kind of what's happened over history over time and kind of where we are today. And then look at it, how we actually personalize this and use this to personalize our investment strategy, taking action. We'll also spend a little bit of time kind of digging into, is it active versus passive? Is there an approach that we should use or consider? Is it one or the other or both? And then, of course, we want to be, as we walk out of this call today, we also want to be forward thinking about where we are with this topic too. And that is, what are the things that impact, this kind of investing? Of course, things that impact all investing, but specifically this, the legislative side, as well as what we're seeing in future trends, because I think there's some really neat things that we're seeing in this particular area. And so that's where I want to dig in as we kind of get started today. And so I'm gonna start with Brad, because Brad, I got to tell you, when I go out to Google I Googled socially conscious investing, which maybe a lot of people did on the call today. You're probably thinking, okay, what is this all about? I can see the little description on the webinar, but what does it really mean? So I probably went out there and Googled it. And the first thing I'm going to be met with is 4.7 million results. And I'm like, oh man, I mean, which one of these is the correct definition? Are they all correct? Or is it only looking at socially conscious investing? Is it, it's only pieces of it? So there's a lot of results out there. So clearly there's a lot of information, some good, some bad. What I'd really like to know is what's relevant for me to know today. And so, Brad, I want you to maybe declutter that for us a little bit. Help us understand what these acronyms mean: SCI, SRI, ESG, and so forth.
Yeah, and I don't know that there are standard definitions, but we have our definitions, and I think they're pretty close to how more and more people are talking about it. And it's definitely how we'll be talking about it today on the call. So that's probably a good place to start and just kind of level set on what we mean when we throw out acronyms, which our industry is unfortunately really bad at using a ton of acronyms. So first, let's start with SRI, which stands for socially responsible investing. To us, we think of that as more along the lines of maybe religious principles or screening and looking for specific things that people want to avoid. So it might be, other examples might be tobacco or alcohol or guns or contraceptives or any number of issues that hit on some type of social hot button issue. And usually what those end up looking like is it's a kind of a binary choice of, does this company participate in this activity or do they not? And so then since it's kind of a binary thing, what ends up happening a lot with SRI strategies is we screen those out. If it's an SRI strategy that is focused on guns, simply we don't buy stocks that manufacture, sell whatever guns. And so socially based, exclusionary. On the other end of the spectrum, or the other acronym that gets thrown out is ESG, for environmental, social, and governance. And a lot of times, instead of looking for a binary choice, it's how is this company doing on environmental issues? Are there practices that are part of whatever they're manufacturing or whatever it is that causes them to pollute more? Or do they have histories of controversies in an area of labor relations? And so it's not a binary thing. There's a gradient of good performers and poor performers. And as such, you don't have to screen out whole industries or companies that don't do well. But there's a lot more nuance that can be had in how is this company in this area? How have they been historically, and what do we think they'll be doing going forward in terms of their adherence to ESG issues within their companies? And so those are the two kind of more granular terms. And then for us, socially conscious investing, or SCI, which it gets shortened to at times, is really the umbrella term that encompasses both SRI, that ends up being exclusionary, and ESG, which is more of a sliding scale, more gray area there.
Okay, that's really great. I think that gives us a good foundation from where we can kind of go from here. And Brad, we're going to come back to you a little bit later because I want to kind of pick back up on a few things you said there, which, specifically about the screening process. And how do we take that personalization kind of to the next level? And so before we get there, let's just a quick history lesson. So Ken, I'm going to let you be the historian here. Right. And so let's talk about this and take just a slight step back from where we are in the definitions and go backwards just a little bit, and maybe talk about the history of where things have been with SRI, and then where we are as to where we are today. Because as I said a little bit earlier, it wasn't that long ago where I remember people saying, yeah, I'm not going to go invest in that strategy because there was no return for me on that. And so maybe we can share a little bit on the history on that.
Yeah, and from what I gather, when I go back and look at this universe, it kind of, to me, it looks like it started, I would say, more with kind of religious principles, and then I think as we, kind of more modern times, we started moving away from where it wasn't just looking at religious principles more, kind of in the 60s when you had kind of the counterculture revolution where folks decided, you know what, I want to invest with companies that, that do right by the environment, whatever, more that align with what I feel. And then I think it really started kind of heating up then toward the other end of exclusionary, where you saw state and local governments, you saw institutions, foundations that didn't want to invest in apartheid South Africa. So that kind of, I think, started bringing it more toward the, in the news. You actually saw, where the state of California will no longer invest in XYZ company because they do business in South Africa. So I think that's kind of what kind of moved it more into the media. And then I think it really began to heat up more with the generations that kind of followed my generation, where, they were saying, they look at, especially millennials, I really want to invest with companies that are good stewards within the community. And I think that's kind of what's brought us around to, sort of to where we are today, kind of bringing it from religion over to, hey, how does this fit with me?
Yeah, that's really great examples. And another example I can throw in there too, and that is I've this last year, COVID has really elevated a lot of these kinds of conversations. And I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of Gen Zs. I think they're calling them Zoomers. I'm not sure exactly. You get confused sometimes of what the title is, so to speak. But it's essentially folks that are under 26 years old. And much like the millennials, they are putting their pocketbooks where their values are. And so that's a really important piece. When I've talked to folks within that generation who are just now getting started on the investing side, they're very, very specific about what they want to invest in. And we've got to be able to do that. So Andy, maybe we kind of talk a little bit about that on the personalization side, because it's one thing to know this history. It's one thing to know these definitions. But it's another thing to know, can we actually implement the way in which we think we can, and our clients need to be implementing, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it does. And everything starts from the past, right? And so as we've seen this evolution, a lot of it's just been driven by demand, right? And you said it, I think, really well, George. It's as we've gone through, we've started to focus a little bit more on how we live and the things we value and where we spend our money with, what types of companies we spend our money with. And then the next logical question is just be, well, why not do that with our investments too? And so as we've kind of gotten to that point, we've seen a lot of demands saying, hey, I know there's all these different ways to go about this out there, but here's my values, right? Here are the themes I believe in, right? I care about the environment, or I care about future generations. I've talked to a lot of folks that are, in their 60s, 70s, 80s and beyond, and are really focused on making sure that things are set up well for next generations too. And so we're seeing that across the board, and we're hearing from a lot of folks that want to know, how do I make this work for me, right? And so as we kind of go into this next stage of the evolution of this whole socially responsible space or investing with your values space, I think it's really coming down to, how do we align our own values with our specific investments? And I know Brad is working on some stuff, here in a second on the actual implementation of the personalization. But from my point of view, working with people kind of day in and day out, is, if you go back 10, 15 years, all of our financial plans are really driven by what's a good investment out there? Where should we put our money? How should we invest? And then over the last several years, it's become much more about, well, what are your goals, right? And how do we make sure your finances align to drive those goals forward? And this is just the next evolution of that. And we say, not only how do we use your finances to drive your goals forward, but how do we match those to your values so you feel really good about it and you stay really confident in the ups and downs that we face as time goes on as well.
Yeah, I really like what you said there. You've described it to me in the past of linking our wealth to our values it's I guess simply the next evolution of linking it to as it was to linking to our goals. I think, I always look at wealth management as the convergence, or sometimes I'll even use the term collision, of the importance of money in our life on one hand, and on the other hand, the things that are most important in our life. And the reason I use the term collision is because sometimes it takes a collision to actually identify whether or not you're investing and the way in which you believe. And that's really what we're talking about here, is that it is now possible to look at what your values are that you're trying to pass on to your children and the next generation, and actually invest according to your values, not just to our goals, as you just mentioned. And I think that's a really great point. But to get there, again, back to what you already pointed out, which was Brad is working on solutions and tools to actually implement this. So Brad, you want to talk a little bit about that? And then I want to maybe, if you could talk a little bit more specifically about some of the screenings that you do and some of the things that, that maybe we're doing today we weren't able to do a few years ago.
Yeah, and this is just all a result of technology. It's changing every industry, and ours is not immune to that. And so, yeah, what we're doing now is we're spending a lot of time figuring out how can we, in a broad mass way, customize portfolios to actually meet clients' values. And I think that's been kind of one of the impediments to really doing ESG well, in a sense, historically, because everybody's values are slightly different. And so, we do run ESG strategies that have track records, and they're good, and we follow a mandate. But the problem is that's not a lot of people's, that's not some people's definition of what they consider ESG or XRI, or that's not the value that is important to them. And in that case, it's just not really a fit. And so to be able to leverage technology to have a client articulate to us, what type of exposure do we need in a portfolio? And that's probably in a conjunction with Andy or in a wealth advisor to say the niche in your portfolio that we need to fulfill is large cap, or it's a combination of large cap and mid cap. But then to hear from the client in terms of, okay, what are your values? What don't you want in your portfolio? What characteristics do you want us to emphasize in your portfolio? And to the extent that they can kind of articulate that, there's a good chance we can build a portfolio out of that that will match those goals now and going forward. And so some of the examples of those can be as basic as, I just want higher quality ESG companies. So, there are ratings agencies and scoring services out there, and we can just say, we just want the best of those. And so not necessarily screening out anything, just good companies. But we could also then drill down and exclude sectors such as energy, or a more granular approach is industry groups, such as maybe just E&P companies within the energy sector, and then maybe even down to specific companies. Or we can do screens and set up portfolios based on kind of business involvement or revenue derived from something. So, examples there could be as diverse as from fur to controversial lending practices to fossil fuel involvement, civilian firearms, and the list goes on and on and on. And so, once we kind of set up this kind of menu of, here's the areas in the market we think you need exposure to from a financial planning perspective and from an investment management perspective, and then marry that with kind of this list of opportunities to customize to the client fit, I think it can be really powerful.
You said several things there that made me think of something, and that is, I can't help but think that the most important piece of this is having really good open communication, with your advisor. Like Andy, if you were my advisor, it'd be like having a really good open communication with you and sharing what's important to me on topics like this. Because as Brad just said, there are a number of ways in which we can measure, we can look at, we can screen, so forth and so on. But it only can come from what we know about you. So if you're taking notes today, I hope you write this down. And that is, next time I talk to my financial advisor, I need to share some of these things that are most important to me, of my values. Because if they're that important to you, you need to be having a conversation about whether or not your investment strategy conflicts with that. And if it does, how do you mitigate that? I think if you write that down, that way when you talk to your financial advisor, you can have that open dialogue. And I think, Andy, I'm sure that's a conversation that you have on a regular basis with your clients, as we were just talking a little bit ago.
Yeah, I think it definitely is, George. I mean, it's, like we said, it's the next evolution, right? And a lot of the things Brad was talking about is simply the way for us to bridge the gap from folks coming to us and saying, hey, I don't really know like what this is or what it's called, but I don't want to invest in that, right? Or I really would like to invest in kind of that theme, right? Of whatever might be most important to them. And so we got the tools where before it was, somewhat of a manual process, and that was all right. But now with these tools, we're able to go even more granular and really dive in. And as a lot of the things and a lot of the research that Ken, I know you're doing on a regular basis every day, continues to expand, it's starting to get really, really neat and really interesting as far as how we can actually build these portfolios and have the information and the knowledge on these companies to, not only do it well, but do it very, very specifically and correctly as well too.
Yeah, and I appreciate, I have one of my little bullet points that I want to talk about is, future trends and trends in technology. I'm really tempted to maybe start talking right now. I was going to talk about toward the end about future trends. So maybe we'll come back to that because I want to bring up something else that I think is also can create confusion when you're investing just in general. But I think it applies to SRI as well, or SEI, ESG. And that is, active versus passive. I don't know who wants to jump in on this this question here, but is it active? Is it passive? Is it both? Is it? I don't know. Ken, it looks like you raised your hand.
Yeah, I know, and the correct answer is probably it's a combination of both. But okay. I have a huge bias in that I'm an active manager, so
okay.
And I can tell you what I found for clients that are looking to invest in this space is. Well, first off, most of them don't want to give up performance. They want, they want it, whether it's I manage large cap core, so they want that piece to perform like large cap core will perform. So when we're kind of building these portfolios, we actually look at the company first. The fundamentals of that company. Is this a solid company? Is it growing earnings? Blah blah blah. Is it doing? The way we pick stocks, for an average portfolio that is not SCI. And, what's nice about the environment we're in now is that, and we'll talk about this, I think, later in future trends, is that companies recognize that they need to be on the right side of this ESG, SRI. And so they are doing more and more. So we'll call it the pond efficient is much greater now than I think it was 20, 25 years ago. And I think, again, why clients they want active is they want to see what is in their portfolio. And I think not only because, they might see something that conflicts with, as Andy said, that conflicts with their values that they can say, hey, I don't want to own that. But I think more than that sometimes is, hey, we own XYZ company. I'm going to give my business to XYZ company because I view them as a good social steward. So, yeah, again, I think it probably is a combination. So I'll let Brad or Andy argue the kind of the passive side while I argue the active side. With transparency, though, would be my main point on the active side.
Yeah, I definitely understand. So. Andy, is you going to go?
Yeah, I was just going to say, on that front, it's been a really interesting trend, and that it's kind of neither and both, right? In the sense that I think if you look at the traditional style of active management, and it's something where maybe you're investing in a bunch of mutual funds, right, where you've kind of turned it over to a bunch of outside managers and are trying to put all the pieces together, that can be a little more challenging. And I think that's a lot of times what's led people to kind of more of the passive space, in there. But if you're able to kind of look at some individual companies, right, and kind of skip the mutual fund route, a lot of times you can kind of blend that, I think, really well. And some form of active management, which doesn't mean active trading, right? It just means you're actively on top of things, you're actively managing it, really bodes well to this, because that's how you make sure these companies are living up to the standard, right? That's how you make sure they're trending in the right direction, not only financially, but also with their values and how those values match with the folks that we work with as well.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Your last point there, Andy, is, maybe to level set just a bit. When we talk about active management, what we're trying to say is, we will have managers such as Ken Powell, who are experts in that area of the market. and spend all day, every day researching stocks, and through their superior knowledge of those companies will try and pick the ones that are more likely to outperform the market than not. And so, through that intimate knowledge, you also, beyond just making a decision on is this going to outperform or is it not, are being able to pick up on trends on, this company may not be ESG in most people's mind today, but we think it's trending in that direction because of all the things that they're doing, where you don't get that in a passive or more mechanistic way of kind of screening out companies. You get that through an expert that knows the companies. So there's definitely something to be said for that.
That's a great point, Brad. We do that. We incorporate within our approach. We look at what is the trend in history of that company and put a lot of weight into that. So that's a great point.
We want to buy companies if there's a value that's important to you. It's probably more important, what is the company doing now and what are they going to be doing in the future, rather than kind of what's their historical track record in doing or not doing the thing that you care about. So I think the flip side, on the passive side, which a lot of the portfolios that I manage in the more quantitative way that we talked about earlier, border on passive. And I think what sets that apart, or what makes it worth considering, just kind of fill out this conversation, is that since we're doing things kind of quantitatively, that's what gives us the ability to at scale give everybody the portfolio that fits their values. Where if we have kin or a team of kins, they're going to manage one strategy or three strategies or five strategies that are our best ideas and have the best chance of outperforming the market, and match the values that they've set forth kind of in the mandate for that strategy, where we can kind of flip that in the passive space and say, okay, for Mr. and Mrs. Smith, their values are A, B, C, and D. Let's build a portfolio specifically for them. And then with the help of technology, we can do that many times over and give more customization. But it's really what the trade-off there is the effort to outperform an index or beat the market is what we give up in exchange for that level of customization. We're going to give you exposure to large cap growth or small cap value, in line with those values, but not to outperform.
Yeah. And I appreciate that last point. And this goes back to something we were talking a little bit earlier about, Andy, when you were kind of sharing the importance of, kind of knowing your client, of course. And I talked about the importance of, what's important about money, what role does it play in your life, and what's most important to you. And the key is that what does your performance need to be to reach your goals? It may or may not need to be the market return. It needs to be the return you need. And so when you compare, so sometimes you're gonna be looking at this and think, well, I'm not getting what the market got. Well, that's true, but that's not really what you need for your particular goal. And so you want to look at this from what is your goal that you're trying to achieve and get to, and then how do I get to that goal and focus on that. And so that allows you to do the things you just described, Brad, which is to focus on those things are most important, build a portfolio that's designed for you because that's what's important to you.
Thanks again for downloading this episode of Your Life Simplified, which is produced by Mariner Wealth Advisors. And at Mariner Wealth Advisors, we're here to serve as your advocate. We help people chart a course to reach their personal and financial goals so that they can have greater peace of mind that may lead to a more fulfilling life. We do this by always putting our clients first. Because as fiduciaries, we're required to provide guidance that's in the best interest of clients, not in the best interest of a company or shareholders or anyone else. So as you listen to this podcast and have questions about maybe your own financial situation, or would simply like a second opinion, or even you have an idea for a future podcast, please go ahead and email us at podcast@marinerwealthadvisors.com. If you found the information on this podcast valuable, please go ahead and share it with a friend or family member that you think might benefit from this information. And please don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for listening, and now back to the episode.
We had a question that came in that as a passive investor, is there a good way to evaluate a mutual fund or an ETF against SCI or ESG criteria. I mean, we have tools, but I'm not sure that necessarily those tools are available to the general public as easily. I don't know.
Yeah,
There are a handful of like social indexes, the KLD social, was it social 400, Andy? Do you know the exact? There are some, but again, I think, then I would go back to what you were saying, George, about maybe you need to measure your performance versus what your needs are. So.
I'd say that reporting along those, especially on the funds that purport to be ESG or SRI funds, a lot of effort is being put into reporting now. In kind of any of the big ETF, companies that have them probably have a ton of information on their websites about exactly what the process is for inclusion and exclusion. That's another good thing about it. Passive is, they say, here are the rules. This is what we're going to do, and then they go do it. And so
that's true.
You kind of drill in there. But just to look at any mutual fund through an ESG SRI lens, I'm not aware of any kind of resources out there to kind of look at those specifically.
Yeah, and to your point, the prospectus is going to have the detail of the rules as it relates to that particular fund. Another question, current trends. This is, I think, a really great question, and that is, read this here. Do the current trends associated with ESG or SRI suggest that at some point this investment methodology will be the accepted norm for how we invest versus an anomaly that it's been in the past? And so, I mean, I have my own opinion. I'll let you guys share your opinion in a minute, but I have my own opinion on this. And that is, I do believe that this is becoming an accepted norm more so than in the past. And I think, especially in the last 2 years, I've seen an elevation and an expectation. In fact, there was and I don't know if you all saw this, but one of our regulators, FINRA, is one of the regulators in the broker-dealer industry. And so they actually just passed some rules as it relates to the composition of boards in order for them to meet their specific guidelines. And so when you start seeing things like that, when the regulators start getting involved, which will take us to our next conversation, which is legislative impacts, is when you start seeing that, then it moves beyond an anomaly from my perspective. So what do you guys think?
I agree. And you're not only seeing it on the regulatory side, you're seeing it in the market. A ranking group, their name, Sustainalytics, was recently purchased by Morningstar. And Morningstar realizing that, hey, this is a trend that looks like it will continue. The Bloomberg database that most investment professionals use now, they have committed a lot of resources for analyzing companies that are what the different factors for ESG. So you're seeing a lot of a lot of these firms get into measuring this. So yeah, it appears like it's going to continue, and not only measurement companies, but also the companies themselves are pouring more resources into it. My personal opinion would be, I think within the next 10 years, we'll see, whether we call it this, but ESG departments within companies. So Microsoft will have a director of ESG, will have employees reporting to that person, where that is their sole responsibility, is to make sure the company is adhering to these principles.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Ken. I think, again, we're seeing that trend already, and I think it's going to stop being a trend, and it's going to become the norm. On that, kind of sticking with you for a second, Ken. One of the most important things that we do as helping our clients, being advocates for our clients, is being able to help with blind spots, of course, and understanding what's around the corner that they can't see. And so watching what's happening, we look at legislative impacts, we look at other future impacts. What are you seeing that you're paying really close attention to now as it relates to this particular topic? Kind of hit on it probably a little bit there, but maybe you can expand on just a little bit on that. Brad, I'll come to you on the Department of Labor kind of stance on 401ks in a minute.
Sure. I think we are seeing it for investment managers, investment management firms. I think you're going to see a set of principles or guidelines, because you have a lot of firms saying, oh yeah, we're ESG or we're SRI now, and there's no true guidelines as to what makes that investment firm truly ESG or SRI. So I think we'll see more standardized guidelines for this type of investing for folks in my field. I think we'll also start seeing more private investment opportunities, not just public companies, but I think hedge funds are realizing that this looks sustainable, so they're going to look at private things more. Even more sustainable investing will be the new word, I think, that we'll see, that will kind of add on to ESG and SRI. We've got a different regime in the White House now, so I think you're going to start seeing in the marketplace more more mandates on alternative energy. Power plants will have to have X amount of energy that's produced from alternative sources. Electric vehicle mandates. By you're especially seeing it in Europe. By this date, we'll have to have this percentage of vehicles will have to be electric vehicles. So so that's going to make kind of these niche companies more more mainstream and larger companies that are producing this types of products and services.
Yeah, no, it's all a great point. And I guess, the important thing, the takeaway there that I hear is that, we're keeping an eye on this because we need to know what's happening going forward so that we can make adjustments and changes along the way. I think that's really important. But you also said something else there, which is private companies, which means whether it's private equity, private placement opportunities, investment opportunities that typically can only be obtained through working with, a financial advisor, are going to be things that you're going to start seeing more of in this area as well. I'm already starting to see it, especially on the opportunity zones as an example, that have some, kind of ESG, kind of component to it in some cases as well. Brad, on the Department of Labor, there's been a little bit of, I'm going to call it noise, a little bit of noise this fall on that. I don't recall where that all landed. Do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, and I think it mostly ended up being noise. But
okay.
That was the, there were probably some headlines that you may have read if you're reading, about ESG investing earlier this fall, talking about the Department of Labor banning, killing, ending ESG funds in retirement plans. And so just to kind of a little bit of background, the Department of Labor is the regulator for 401ks and all ERISA plans such as 401ks and other retirement plans. And they had put out a preliminary rule saying that that could be read as trying to push 401ks to exclude ESG investments. Really what they were doing was to say
and he has an opinion too, it looks like.
So what ended up happening after all was said and done is the Department of Labor's final rule said that that the investments that are chosen for 401k plans have to be judged on the merits of things that are going to lead to performance or risk. So no issues that aren't related to risk or performance in one way or the other, which really for us, I talked to my counterpart that leads the research for our 401k business, and her response was, that's how we've always looked at them. I think there was this misconception, and maybe it goes back to, George, what you said at the beginning, which is early in your career, you would say, look, we don't want to do ESG investing. Like, you're not going to get a return here. And I think that mentality led people to think that, oh my gosh, the Department of Labor is going to end ESG funds. But really, the industry here has improved a lot. And there's a lot of funds that could already be seen as equal to other funds that aren't ESG related. And so when our retirement plan group looks through funds and does research on funds and monitors them for are they appropriate to be included in a plan, they were judged by exactly the same standard the whole way through. And so it ended up being kind of a non-issue for us, and then and then as bills do, they got watered down.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I thought that I remember hearing some of that. To your point, a lot of that is noise. But I appreciate the background on that as to what was going on. So Andy, kind of broadly speaking, how do you stay in front of trends, or anything in particular that you do?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think just what Ken and Brad said is kind of telling. I mean, you think of trends, and we try to think as logically as we can a lot of times right here at Mariner, and I'm sure a lot of folks do. And what we've seen is kind of looking ahead, right? We're always looking for the next Apple, right? Or something like that from the financial standpoint. And what we're finding is there's actually a lot of value when you're looking at companies, when you're looking at other things and other investments from the standpoint of these social screens, right? And I mean, just to think of it logically for a second. If a company treats its people really well, it's going to score high in the social space. If it treats people really well, they tend to be more productive. There's study after study that shows that, right? If companies do a little bit better at treating the environment well and they have less fines, that helps, right? We can all think back, 10 years or so now to BP in that example. And so I think what you're seeing is we start thinking about not just the trends of the socially responsible space, but also how does that apply to screening and finding really good investments. I'll let Ken, kind of do, but what I believe is that we're really starting to see these criteria and use them almost as risk management views, right? In the sense of looking at companies. And so just because everything goes through a financial screen first, doesn't mean you can't add financial value by also scoring high in these other areas, right? Whatever that scoring system may be. And so I think that's one of the biggest trends that we're seeing and one we're trying to stay in front of on that front.
Yeah, that's a really great point. A very interesting point, that it doesn't necessarily have to be a traditional social governance type, company per se. But what I think, I like what you said. It's, if they're treating their people right, most likely the outcome is going to be positive, because it all kind of flows. If you've got a company who's got a history of not treating their employees, in a good way, then that impacts the client experience, the customer experience, which impacts the bottom line, which impacts the investors, ability too. And I think that shareholders are going to be holding companies accountable for that as well. So it's a really great point. So to kind of wrap things up here on a kind of final note here on future trends, we were talking a little bit earlier about technology and trends in customization. And so one of the things, when it comes to technology, you're exactly right. I don't know who said it now. I can't remember who it was. Said that technology is allowing us to see things in ways that we weren't able to see 10 years ago. And whether it's screenings or whether it's the social governance that you were just talking about, Andy, the technology is allowing us to see this. So over the course of the last couple of years, where I sit in a role that I have with Mariner is I get introduced to new technologies on a fairly regular basis. And I have seen new technology that is there to what I call hyper-personalize, your experience as an investor. And some of the things that I'm seeing are artificial intelligence, machine learning, that will not only take into consideration your values, but it also takes into consideration where the rubber hits the road. So if, for example, you take your spending patterns and you apply that to your investing patterns, it can actually, there's technology out there that will look at both of those and say, this is how your dollar is working in your spending patterns. You might want to consider this as far as your investment patterns. So the point you guys raised earlier, where your dollars are going, you may want to consider investing in companies that support the dollars you spend, or where you're not going, as another example. I see you're spending money here, which might be in contradiction to what your values are. So therefore, we make some adjustments. Those are the kinds of trends that I'm seeing in technology as well. So I just want to, thank you guys for being on the call today. This has really been a good discussion. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks again for listening today, and we hope you found this information valuable. As always, we'd love to hear from you, so let us know how we're doing by giving us feedback. If you'd like to learn more about our monthly live webinar series, go to marinerwealthadvisors.com/live-webinars. And if you have any ideas for future podcasts, be sure to let us know that too by emailing us at podcast@marinerwealthadvisors.com. As always, we encourage you to share the podcast with family and friends. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a future episode of Your Life Simplified. We look forward to being with you again soon.
Mariner Wealth Advisors Advisors, or MWA, is an SEC-registered investment advisor with its principal place of business in the state of Kansas. Registration of an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. MWA is in compliance with the current notice filing requirements imposed upon registered investment advisors by those states in which MWA maintains clients. MWA may only transact business in those states in which it is notice filed or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from notice filing requirements. Any subsequent direct communication by MWA with a prospective client shall be conducted by a representative that is either registered or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from registration in the state where the prospective client resides. For additional information about MWA, including fees and services, please contact MWA or refer to the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website at www.advisorinfo.sec.gov. Please read the disclosure statement carefully before you invest or send money.